This is part of the Grand Lodge project for uh, North Carolina's Living History Project. And we're going to learn a little bit more about Ray Casey's life and his journey.
I grew up in Wayne County, North Carolina. Goldsboro was the home. I was born in 1950. I'm an only child. My parents had been married almost 15 years, and I guess they thought that we're going to be unlucky, and then all of a sudden the Lord shined on them, and here I am. I spent most of my life on a dairy farm. Hard work, perseverance. Went to Goldsboro High School. I finished in 1967, and for those of you that want to add it all up, I'm 75 years old. I've been a Mason for 52 years, and it's probably been one of the most rewarding experiences that I have ever had in my life. My dad was a Mason, so I'm a second generation Mason here in North Carolina. I met a lot of my dad's friends, and they were usually all Masons. My dad was active in Blue Lodge, but he was more active in Yorkright. I have an uncle who was in the state of Virginia who became a Mason in the state of Virginia because of my dad. I have a first cousin in Goldsboro who became a Mason. I'd like to think it was because of me, but I'm sure it was more because of my father. Well, number one was the fact that that's the first time I had ever been in Lodge, knowing that my dad was going to be in there. And I was very nervous. I had no earthly idea what was going on. I went through my entered apprentice degree, and after it was over, one of the elderly, well, he was older than I was. I was only 21 at the time, so everybody in there was older than I am. Asked me, said, "Have you ever experienced anything like that?" And I looked him in the eye and I said, "I sure have." He kind of backed up and said, "What do you mean?" And I said, "Well, I was in a fraternity when I was in college, and it was Sigma Phi Epsilon. And evidently, it was formed at the University of Richmond, and there were a lot of ministers that formed that fraternity. And evidently, a lot of them were Masons, because there were a lot of similarities between the two initiations."
How many lodges have you been a part of?
Actually, I've been a part of 3 lodges. Wayne Lodge number 112 is my home lodge. I joined Knights of Solomon 764 in Charlotte, and then when they opened up one in the eastern part of the state, I joined that, which was Knights of Solomon 766, and shortly after that I demitted from the Knights of Solomon in Charlotte. So I'm just a member of two lodges now.
And were you masters in both or just one?
Just one.
And tell me a little bit about your experience about being a master of a lodge.
When I first went into Masonry, things were a lot different then than they are now. Most of the officers always had on coats and ties. Most of the members were always dressed. There were no blue jeans, no flip-flops, no tennis shoes. We had a lot of businessmen who were Masons, and of course when you come from work to go to lodge, you mostly are in a coat and tie. It was very formal as far as dress. The formal part of the opening and closing, to me back then, is better than it is now. I think people took more pride in doing their degree work in opening and closing. I've seen a lot of changes in Masonry over the last 50-some years, and to me some of them have been okay, some of them have been just disastrous. I may shoot myself in the foot for saying this, but I'm going to say it. I think when we opened it up to 18-year-olds, we did ourselves a disservice. Honestly, I don't think people that are 18 years old are ready to make the decision about what Masonry really is. And I know that we have brought in some Masons into our lodge that were young men that once they got there, they decided it wasn't for them and they never came back or never finished. And that to me, that's a shame, because they joined for whatever reason, but somehow or another they didn't get the grasp of what Masonry really is.
I know that you take pride in one of your positions, and you've done it for many years. Tell us a little bit about being a treasurer of a lodge.
Had never given any thought to being treasurer, and most of the time when I was in lodge, we had a brother whose name was Preston Smith, who was our treasurer. And just before an election, Preston came to me and said, make sure you're at lodge Monday night. And I said, why? He said, because I told you so. And so I went to lodge. Came time to vote for the treasurer's position, and Preston said, brethren, I've had it as long as I want it. I will not accept if elected, and I think that you need to vote for somebody else. So they started voting, and evidently it fell my lot because I won. And this is my 32nd year as treasurer. 1 year I declined, and they elected someone else, and before we could get him installed, he decided that he didn't want to do it, so they came back and asked me would I stand for election if the Grand Master would approve it. And I said, well, unless you can talk somebody else into doing it, I'll do it. And that was 12 years ago. So I'm still hanging on. I enjoy looking after the finances of the lodge because of the people who were mentors to me and what they did to make sure that our lodge was successful. They were good stewards of our money. And I'd like to be able to say whenever I finally retire from that position or they elect someone else, they can say that I was a good steward of the lodge money as well. Probably should have brought my dues cards with me. They're, right after I became a Mason, they had a York-Rite class just before Sudan Shrine Temple was going to have a spring ceremonial. I took the York-Rite. 2 weeks later, I went into the shrine. Still a very young man. I was only 21 at the time. But my dad was a Shriner as well, and it gave us an opportunity to, I won't say bond any more than we already had, but it gave us an opportunity to share something that no one else in my family would be able to say that they shared with my dad. From there were a tremendous amount of associate orders with York-Rite Masonry that I have become a member of, and they're too many to number. And I will be honest with you, the more I say, it probably would sound like I'm bragging of all the bodies that I belong to. And I didn't join them just so I could say, hey, I'm a member of this. I joined them to serve. And I have really had a good time. I spent a lot of time in the shrine when I was much younger. We have a unit in Sudan which is called the Wrecking Crew, which is, it used to be the initiation part, the fun part of initiating people into the shrine. That has changed over the years because of hazing laws and other things. But in 2007, I was the president of the Shrine Directors International, and that was a highlight of my shrine career. I have met people all over this country. I have friends everywhere that I have met through the shrine, and they're lifelong friends. I can say the same thing about York-Rite Masonry. It has been a blessing to me to have an opportunity to have witnessed a lot of people who are no longer here and what they did to develop young people like myself at that time. And I give credit to all of the mentors that I had because they put and instilled in my mind the desire to want to serve my fellow man. And I hope that I have done a good job. I hope when I lay my working tools down that somebody might be able to say he did justice to what he tried to do.
You served with honor as being Grand High Priest several years ago, and you're one of the few gentlemen that have been allowed to go through another line. What prompted you to decide to run through a whole second line?
The year that I ran in the Grand Chapter, I had previously run probably 6 years earlier twice in the Grand Council line and did not get elected. I was young. I was ambitious. I really wanted to serve. So after I didn't get elected, I just kind of put it out of my mind. Well, when they came to me and asked me to run in the chapter line, it was John Walston Sr. and John Worrell, who were both in the chapter line, and they both wanted me to run. And I said, guys, if I run and get beat, will y'all leave me alone? And they said, yeah, if you don't win this time, we'll understand. Well, as it turned out, I got elected. And that very weekend in Charlotte, David Hargett came to me and said, you're running in the wrong line. I said, what do you mean? He said, you're a commandery man. And I said, well, I do a lot of the commandery degrees for Goldsboro. And he said, well, I should say commandery orders, because they're not degrees, they're orders. And I said, besides that, there's somebody running from Goldsboro that already has his name on there. And I said, I can't do that to a fellow companion. He said, well, he's not going to get elected, I can tell you that, but you are. But David feigned disappointment because I didn't run in the Grand Commandery line. And after I got out of the Grand Chapter line, I told David, I said, David, if the opportunity ever comes my way, I'm going to run in the Commandery line because I don't want to disappoint you. He had done a lot for me, introduced me to people that helped me learn more about masonry, more about myself. And he saw something in me that I don't think other people did, and I just didn't want to disappoint him. So that's why once I got an opportunity to run in the Grand Commandery line, I did. And I've now been asked, after I get out of the Commandery line, am I going to try to run in the council line? And my response was yes, as hard and as far away from it as I can.
Yeah, that's not going to make it in the edit.
No, that's not going to make it. Oh, come on. I'm just too old to try to run again. It would have been nice to have been able to serve in all three bodies, but as a young man coming up, they just didn't let that happen in the state of North Carolina.
How has Freemasonry impacted your life?
Not only has it impacted my life, it's impacted my family's life. When Linda and I got married, she didn't know anything about masonry. As we moved on in our marriage, she saw the desire that I had to go to meetings, participate. She was very active with me in the shrine. She's very active with me in Blue Lodge, anything that goes on that she can help with. She became mother advisor of our Rainbow chapter in Goldsboro, and she's been there almost 23 years. And she did that because my daughter wanted to become a Rainbow girl. And Kimberly stayed until she could majority out. And now she's on the advisory board with her mother, and of course I'm the treasurer of that body as well. We've just grown together as a Masonic family. I could not have done anything that I've done without their support. And they have made Masonry an important part of our life. It lives and dwells in our house, and it's something that we talk about every day. I got in the Eastern Star because Linda wanted to get in the Eastern Star. That has brought us closer together. We've served as worthy matron, worthy patron. My daughter and I have served as worthy patron and worthy matron. And Linda and I ended up during the COVID time being the district deputy for our district for 3 straight years because we couldn't have meetings and they just didn't change us out. Our life revolves around some facet of Masonry. A lot of people don't understand that. It's hard for people to, you give that much time. Well, we do because we enjoy it, we love it. Masonry has been a lot. It's meant a lot to me. It's allowed me to open friendships that I would have never had, never met people. Even here in North Carolina, I have it's a bad habit of saying I'm a nobody. Well, Billy Deal gets really ticked at me when I say that. And this past year, he's made it his priority to introduce Mr. Nobody at a lot of meetings. And it's a joke because I don't look at anything I've done in masonry to benefit myself. I look at it as though it's allowed me to benefit my brothers.
Well, you've been a mentor to many, including myself, which is
I appreciate those kind words.
which is why I asked you to be my first interviewee. So let's talk about a couple of mentors that you looked up to growing up.
I'd love to. I guess other than my dad, the first real mentor I had was a member of my lodge. His name was Cater Davis Pyatt. He was a very strong-willed, forceful man. He worked for Carolina Power and Light Company and had retired. When he found out that I was an employee of Carolina Power and Light Company, he said, "I'm going to be your coach." Well, I knew his reputation from talking to a lot of people that worked for Carolina Power and Light Company, and he didn't take any gruff off of anybody. They did things a lot different back in the 40s and 50s than they do now. A lot of things were handled by word of mouth or word of fist. I was terrified of him. I'd go to his house to be coached, and he was kind of elderly at the time, and he'd go to sleep in the process of coaching me, and I'd sit there and I'd just kind of, he'd wake up and he says, "You answered that last question wrong, let's start again." And I always thought, how do you know I answered it wrong? You were sound asleep. But he had a desire to see me succeed. And in doing that, he gave me a desire to see other people who were young Masons to try to succeed. I mentioned David Hargett a little bit earlier, and Alan Surratt. I met both of those brothers in Mobile, Alabama at the Purple Cross meeting, and had never really had any dealings with them. And David had driven his van to Mobile, and the air conditioning went out, and they got up early the next morning and saw me eating breakfast and said, "Come on, take a trip with us." I said, "Well, let me go tell Linda." I said, "How long are we going to be gone?" "Oh, we'll be back in a little while." I said, "Well, where are we going?" They said, "We got a shade tree mechanic. We got to go get David's van." Well, we left, headed west on I-10. We left Alabama, went into the next state, turned off the interstate on a 2-lane road, turned off the 2-lane road on a dirt path, turned off the dirt path on a donkey path, and when we finally got back to where that shade tree mechanic was at, I had hardly any idea where I was at. 7.5 hours later, they bring me back to Mobile. This was before cell phones. If you don't think my wife was not tied, where have you been? I said, "See those two guys over there? Go get them. Sick them, honey, because they kept me out. They did it to me." Well, that's how I learned what Masonry was about, because they stood right up and said, "Yep, we didn't realize we were going to be gone and have as much fun as we did." And I'm saying, "We didn't have any fun." And they were going, "Oh, yes, we did." But David Hargett saw something in me that I didn't see. He had been a mentor to me. He helped me to increase myself and my awareness of Masonry. I was a member of the Order of the Red Cross here, the Red Cross of Constantine here in the state of North Carolina. And Alan had the job as the Intendant General for the state. Well, he had just been elected to the national line, and they came to me and asked me would I consider taking that appointment. And I said, "Well, it's only for a year, isn't it?" And they said, "No, it's a 10-year appointment if you get reappointed every year." And before I could say, Hargett said, "Thank you." Again, he saw something in me that I didn't see. I can make it till next year. I will have had my 10-year service. But there are a lot of other people that I traveled a lot with. These two brothers are now deceased. One of them was Fred Scott, and the other one was Ken Wichard. And they were from the Goldsboro. Well, Fred Scott was the most illustrious Grand Master of the Council. Ken Wichard's a past Grand Commander. They had been in Masonry, both of them were older than I, but they had been in Masonry much shorter time period than I had been. But we just enjoyed traveling. The friendships that you make, some people that you meet, they're acquaintances, some people will be friends for a few years. But by and large, in these organizations, when you meet somebody and you click, it's for life. It's a lifetime commitment of friendship. The friendship, morality, and brotherly love are just words unless you take them to your heart and your mind. And once you do that, you realize that that bond is forever. And that to me is as an important part of Freemasonry, York Rite, Scottish Rite, it doesn't matter to me. It's something that you take to heart, you believe in, and you try to live every day. And that's what I've tried to do.
If the young Ray Casey was in front of you, what advice would you give him about Freemasonry?
I'd love to see a young Ray Casey sitting in front of me. But my advice to him would be to take everything that he can learn in Freemasonry from someone that he can identify as his mentor, to watch him, to listen to him, maybe even try to emulate him if he thinks that that individual has something that he wants. And I think that every person that comes into Masonry needs to want something other than just a membership card. They want to learn about the degrees. They want to learn about other people within the lodge. They want to learn the inner workings of the lodge. Or maybe I should say they need to learn the inner workings of the lodge. I can always remember that I was told once I got in line that from the first time that I sat in that chair, I needed to make sure I knew my part, but I also needed to learn the part that if I was fortunate enough to move up in line, I would already know it and not have to be taught on an annual basis what the next step of Masonry is. Because that's what learning about Masonry is. It's a step-by-step process. As I've said, I've been a Mason for over 50-some years, and I still learn something every year, every day. Every time I go into a lodge, whether it's my lodge or a lodge that I'm visiting, I look around and I say, these guys got it going on. Or either these guys are just running through the motion. And when you run through the motion, that's when you see lodges start to fold and start to die. When I first became a Mason, my lodge had over 400 members. There was another lodge in Goldsboro, and it was Goldsboro Lodge number 634, and they had over 400 members. Now Goldsboro Lodge is defunct, and we're down to 95 members. Over a 50-year period, Masonry has, I won't say it's gone downhill because it hasn't. What has transpired is we're not showing what we have to offer to people that have no earthly idea what Masonry is. People will go online, they'll research Freemasonry. Some of the things that they may see may be 100% correct, and some of it may not be. And it bothers me because what may not be correct may be what turns them off and makes them decide that Masonry's not for them. Or they don't have someone in their family or someone close that they know who is a Mason, that they can look and see how that man has lived his life, what he's done for his community, what he's done for his church, what he's done for his family. We should be selling Masonry on how we act and how we're perceived in public. And if we do a good job of selling ourselves, the good part of Freemasonry will always rise to the top.
Thank you so much. I appreciate your time. I'm humbled that you'd sit down here with me and let me ask you these questions. Thank you, sir.
Thank you for allowing me the opportunity.